Hello, my name is Markus Wiechel. I'm a member of the Swedish Parliament and the delegation leader of the Swedish delegation to the Council of Europe. I'm sitting right now here in Strasbourg in the Council of Europe together with two Latin American guests. So I would like to welcome Orlando and Ricardo.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us here at the Council of Europe at the Parliamentary Assembly.
Muchas gracias, Markus, por esta hospitalidad y por permitirnos estar en este espacio contigo.
So both of these gentlemen have come here to meet with politicians, to speak in front of political groups, and of course to meet with NGOs. So far we've been here for 3 days, and so far we've had quite a number of different meetings in order to raise the issue of the Cuban dictatorship funding troops in Ukraine, or fighting in Ukraine for the Russians, and also the devastating situation for Cubans in Cuba. So, Orlando, please, could you tell us more about this?
Well, first, Marcos, we want to thank you because you have become a real leader in Europe in support of the right to freedom of the Cuban people. And we have come here, as we've gone to other European countries, as we did also in Sweden, to inform about the presence of Cuban mercenary troops fighting under Russian orders in Ukraine. And this shows how this regime in Cuba continues to be a Russian proxy, in spite of the fact that years have passed by and the Soviet Union disintegrated. The regime in Cuba continues to be an exporter of violence in the world. That is why for us it is so glaring that the European Union is financing this regime.
Yeah, this is really horrible news, and a lot of MPs from all across Europe weren't even aware of this situation, that our taxpayers' money goes to fund the Cuban regime who oppresses their own people, but also who funds the fighting for the Russians in Ukraine. I mean, it's devastating news. What can we do about this?
Well, this is a regime that is being funded by the European Union. So I am the coordinator of a parliament of the Cuban resistance, the parliament of the Cuban resistance, which is called the Assembly of the Cuban Resistance. And it's composed of 40 organizations of diverse type inside and outside Cuba, which has within its fold the diversity and the social uniqueness of different organizations which are suppressed by the regime in Cuba. So I believe that we represent the Cuban people's right to freedom and the Cuban people's right to sovereignty. Our request is that this funding to the regime in Cuba be audited, be reviewed, be suspended, in as much as the regime continues to repress the people of Cuba and participates in the aggression against Ukraine. What's more, we have brought up the idea of an international parliamentary commission that can investigate the involvement of the Cuban regime in the war against the people of Ukraine.
Well, I know for my own sake and for my political party that we have always been opposed to this agreement between the European Union and Cuba. Would you say that this week that you have some good news after this week?
I think we have a lot of traction. I think we have advanced a great deal. Your efforts in Sweden, what the Swedish government has said, based on the prompts that you and Bjorn Söder sent, the questions that were sent by you, the statements, the 2 resolutions passed by the European Parliament asking for the ending of this financing, the resolution and the written statement that the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has approved, presented by you and by other parliamentarians. We're gaining, we're progressing, but I'm still shocked to find out how many European leaders don't even know there's Cuban troops in Ukraine.
And you've talked to parliamentarians from left to right, right?
Yes, we've spoken across the broad spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's great news, actually, and I'm sure that more politicians throughout Europe will wake up. And for myself, I think that it's crucial for you to be able to meet with other politicians. What would you want to do now?
I think it's important to continue to insist at the national level and at the parliamentary level for the European Council to put this issue on their agenda. It needs to be discussed and needs to be reviewed. The Swedish government has clearly stated it on several occasions. Lithuania hasn't even approved the treaty, and we know that in many countries there's great disgust over this financing of this dictatorship. I also wanted to thank you not only for your support for freedom in Cuba, but also for your support for very just causes like in Ukraine and also especially Taiwan.
Thank you very much. Well, I think it's very important to support democratic forces wherever they are, especially when they face dictatorships. We see it in Taiwan, one of the best democracies in that region, actually, one of the top democracies in the world, actually. So when they face the threats from China, then I think we, as part of the free world, should stand up for them and help them prevail. It's the same case in Belarus, and we see the same thing in Venezuela and Nicaragua. We have lots of countries where we are trying to do our best to support the democratic forces. And together with friends like you, I'm sure that we're going to have some progress.
Well, I think we need to stand up for all those people in Taiwan, in Cuba, in Venezuela, and Ukraine who are fighting for their freedom.
Well, Ricardo?
En esta ocasión yo represento al Frente Hemisférico por la Libertad, que es
I represent the Hemispheric Freedom Front.
Una coalición en la que estamos 15 países latinoamericanos, congresistas y representantes de 15 países latinoamericanos, que tenemos muy claro qué es el régimen castrista, cómo operan los regímenes totalitarios en nuestro continente.
The Hemispheric Freedom Front consists of parliamentarians from 15 different Latin American countries who are very concerned about how totalitarianism is advancing once again in Latin America and how these totalitarian regimes operate.
Y en esta ocasión acompaño en la representación de este frente a la Asamblea de la Resistencia Cubana en esta misiva de traer a Europa, al Consejo de Europa, la comprensión o mejor comprensión de lo que el régimen totalitario de Cuba está haciendo, también agrediendo ahora a Ucrania desde el acompañamiento con soldados en esta vergonzosa cruzada que ellos están librando.
Our delegation consists of the Hemispheric Freedom Front and the Assembly of the Cuban Resistance, which is a member also of the front. And our goal is to present to Europe how these regimes are operating in Latin America and how they are carrying out their different political maneuvers on our side of the world.
Y la incongruencia que nosotros como representantes latinoamericanos encontramos en que la Unión Europea financia el régimen cubano, sancione a Rusia, cuando están ocupando el dinero de los europeos para agredir en este caso a Ucrania.
It is incoherent, in our opinion, that the European Union is sanctioning Russia, correctly sanctioning Russia for its aggression against Ukraine, and then it's financing a regime which is exporting its troops to help Russia fight against Ukraine and also doing great harm in the region.
Haciendo uso de nuestra vocación democrática como latinoamericanos, acompañaremos estas causas de libertad en cualquier parte del mundo. En esta ocasión estamos acá, hemos avanzado mucho, te agradecemos el apoyo y a todos los representantes de las delegaciones, de diferentes delegaciones con las que hemos conversado. Seguiremos en esta causa porque estamos convencidos que la libertad merece ser defendida.
We want to thank you for your help, and we're convinced freedom must be defended by the different organizations that understand freedom in different parts of the world. I'd also like to mention that I think Ricardo is the only Latin American parliamentarian who has been to Taiwan and Ukraine in the same year.
Para mí ha sido un placer estar acá y esperamos que estas conversaciones no queden solo en eso, sino que podamos llegar a la concreción de una comisión especial o una comisión ad hoc en la que se pueda investigar este financiamiento para que se detenga de la Unión Europea al régimen cubano.
I hope that we can advance beyond these meetings, which have been very good, to creating an interparliamentary ad hoc commission that can investigate the presence of the regime, the Cuban regime, in the war against Ukraine and bring about the suspension of these funds sent to this regime.
Muchas gracias, Markus.
Thank you, Markus.
Thank you very much, both of you, for traveling this distance and for all the good work that you do.